The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Today is Monday, July 6, 2020. Thanks so much for joining me. I've had several days to just think and to reflect on everything that's happening around us. And in that time, I have come to some realizations that you perhaps already knew, but I had to go and I have to find it for myself. And one of the biggest revelations that I had this weekend was the simplicity of our politics. There's a grand theory of our politics that I think we could use to break down every single scenario. You either blame the powerful or you blame the powerless. Everyone looks at our system and tries to determine how do we, quote unquote, fix something? How do we, quote unquote, progress? And everyone has a different definition of progress. But at the core of it, when you look at the problems in our society, you have those people who blame the powerful and you have those who blame the powerless. And it really just kind of dawned upon me how utterly pathetic it is that so many people who themselves are relatively powerless value their position in society so much that instead of blaming all that they see that is wrong in the world on the powerful, they cherish their position in society so much, or they fancy that they will be able to go higher in society as it is by blaming the powerless. Think of anybody, throw a name out there. Over the weekend, J.K. Rowling. I've never read a single Harry Potter book. Don't intend on reading a single Harry or watch the movie for that matter. But the author of Harry Potter has dedicated her life to attacking trans people. What political, economic, or even societal power do trans people have? Such that a woman who is a billionaire, who has unbelievable influence, unbelievable reach into the minds of millions of people in order to shape their minds with fantasy and prose and narration. She chooses to blame people who are relatively powerless in this society. You could go one step further. You could look at conservatism in general. And they have crafted their entire worldview around explaining the ills of society based on the powerless, people who have no power to change the conditions that are around them, and they barely have the power to change their own personal conditions. Sure, you could pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but when this society is designed to take your bootstraps and make money off those bootstraps, selling them back to you at an inflated price, people scarcely have the opportunity to change their own material conditions in a system that is designed to exploit them at every single stop. But yet and still, people have committed their entire worldview to blaming the powerless. What type of sociopathy is that? Now, I do realize that some people do it strategically. They understand that there's a political value. There's political gains to be had by attacking a subgroup. There's plenty of miles that you can get in your tweets and in your videos, in your YouTube videos, and in anywhere that you have an audience. You can get miles out of, and when I say miles, I mean attention, notoriety, and money out of attacking the powerless. I just can't fathom sitting around and looking at this empire in which we sit and looking at all of the problems, however you diagnose the problem, however you diagnose. See, I believe I'm starting to come to the realization that setting aside the bumpkin conservative, right? Though, and whatever, yeah, bumpkin. Those conservatives who are simply there for the racism and the bigotry at all costs. They have no regard whatsoever to their own economic, material condition. That 50% of Oklahoma that, or 49%, because they barely passed it in Oklahoma, that voted against the Medicaid expansion, even though that Medicaid expansion would benefit 200,000 Oklahomans. There's always going to be people willing to vote against their own best economic interest in order to pacify the bigoted gene in them, or to satisfy all of the propaganda that they have been fed, whatever you want to call it. Of course, you're going to have that group of people who are not interested in progress in any form or fashion. They're simply interested in owning the libs. And before I finish this thought, it's fascinating that there are people who themselves are powerless, but they attach themselves to an ideology that blames the powerless because they don't see themselves as powerless, because they are associated with the powerful in words, in rhetoric, in propaganda. People who are living in a trailer park, barely making it themselves, who have more in common with a poor person living in the urban centers. Those people have attached themselves to an ideology that blames the powerless because they don't see themselves as powerless. They see themselves as heirs to some great American fantasy. They believe that perhaps they haven't worked hard enough to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Or better yet, or more precisely, they believe that the reason they can't pull themselves up by the bootstraps is because of some immigrant. It's fascinating how people can craft an entire worldview around blaming the powerless in a society full of powerful men and women who have done everything that they possibly could with their economic might and their political influence and their control in order to exploit billions of people across the globe. And instead of focusing our attention on the powerful, we have an entire construct of people, an entire construct of a philosophy, a worldview that informs individuals who blame the powerless. You can go even further. I mean, just top to bottom, think of someone that you engage with on social media. Who are they blaming? Right? Because it's easy. What it allows them to do, you got to understand, it's not just whether they realize what they're doing or not. It's not that they just want to blame the powerless. It's that it is easy to blame the powerless, because who's going to defend them? Who's going to fight for them? Who's going to weed through all of the propaganda that is thrown at them, labeling them as lazy, when in fact, the powerless are the hardest working people on the face of the planet. There is no question about this. And yet we laud the people who sit back and make their money by literally sitting on their asses. They make money by just all they do all day long is collect dollars off of their capital gains. Meanwhile, the hardest working people in the world are the powerless, people with no political influence, people with no economic power themselves. And yet, entire worldviews, the whole framing, their whole argument structure, their whole positioning. When they wake up, they're mad at people who have no power. When they wake up, they're angry that some black trans woman did something. They existed. They're angry. They're angry because some protester had the nerve to be in the street trying to protest and trying to change this power structure. And yet they had a nerve to be in the street and, oh, well, if they hadn't been in the street, then they wouldn't have got killed. Rest in power, Summer Taylor. But you have people who look at the powerless, and when they wake up in the morning, they find a way to blame them for all of the ills in society, a society that was crafted by the powerful. I mean, you have people, I can understand if you are in the ruling elite, if you are a billionaire, If you're like Elon Musk and you tweet out something against communism when you are a billionaire, and sure, of course, you're going to do what you can to protect your wealth from being taxed so that you don't have to pay one more cent to contribute to the society from which you derive all your wealth. Of course, you're going to do that. But what's fascinating to me are the people who themselves are barely making it in life who protect people like that. And of course, there's the monetary incentive, right? Elon Musk doesn't have the wherewithal to actually do all of his own propaganda. And so he pays out money to find people to do it on his behalf. Of course, there's a monetary incentive, but how utterly ridiculous a complete framework that blames the ills of society on the powerless in the society. And this is, of course, the model that has existed throughout time. It is the easiest notion to blame people who don't have the wherewithal to defend themselves. It is, of course, the scapegoating that has existed throughout all of world history, because you cannot ever look at the king and realize it is the actions of the king or of the emperor or of the president and the Senate and the Congress. Of course, you'll never turn your rage towards the most powerful people in your society, because then you'll become a threat to the most powerful people in your society. Of course, it works like this. Of course, it is the case that our entire society is not only controlled by the powerful, but it is sustained by the vilification of the powerless. How else could it work? Because if the powerless ever had the wherewithal to act on the reality that it is the powerful, the ruling elite, the richest people in the world, the most connected people in the world, the politicians who have all of the levers of our political system at their disposal, of course they are the reason 128,000 people have died due to COVID-19 when we could have done things to prevent it at the very beginning. But instead of taking care of the powerless, what they did was took care of their stock portfolios. Of course, we're going to blame the powerless, because the system falls apart if we ever turn our rage against the powerful. It's obvious that it works that way. It's obvious that there would be great financial rewards for people who would protect the most powerful, but then who are you going to rage against? If the real problems in society, I mean, how can you blame anyone in society for the ills of that society when they literally have no power in that society? Even if we look at a relative level of power, they have no relative power in the society. And yet you construct your entire worldview. And that's because they have to have someone to blame. They have to have someone to rage against. And this is where we get into the moralizing. Instead of looking at a very practical analysis of what's happening in the world, and if you take a very sober look at what's happening in the world, you cannot see this global system and not recognize the sheer exploitation that is happening, and the fact that the billionaires of this society are getting obscenely rich while most of the world, and when I say most, I mean the overwhelming percentage, I'm talking about billions upon billions of people are struggling just to survive, while a handful of billionaires are getting away with economic murder. You cannot possibly look at society and not see that plain as day. But if you just have to have something to say, and you have aligned yourself with the side, if you've aligned yourself with the powerful, quite frankly, just to put it succinctly, if you have to have something to say, And you have to make you got to perform. You got to put out the tweets. You've got to create the content. You got to create the viral videos. And you know that you cannot call out the powerful because they're writing your checks. Then obviously you vilify the powerless. And this is why the conservative movement and those affiliated with it, even if it's loosely, whether they admit it or not, this is why you have so many commentators. There is an entire economy of commentators who make millions of dollars convincing the masses that the real problem in society are black people. The real problem in society are women. The real problem in society is the LGBTQ community and all of the intersections that go in between. The real problem in society globally, hell, are the people in Yemen, are the Palestinians, are literally the people with the least power on the face of the planet. The people who have to say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, in the face of their own oppression. They literally, if we don't say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, with the right tone with the police officer, that could be the end of our lives. The problem is even exacerbated more in Palestine. And yet there's an entire economy that has been erected around vilifying the most powerless people on the face of the planet. And how do you do it? How do you get away with that? You moralize. You make it an issue of faith and Christianity versus homosexuality. That's a good wedge issue. You make it an issue of immigrants who don't like black folks. That's a great wedge issue that gets black people to turn around and blame people who have even less power than them. You make it an issue of morality, of sexual morality. The reason that sex worker got killed was because she was a dirty sex worker. This entire system is designed around getting you to blame someone who has less power than you instead of blaming the people who have the most power, the people who created the system, the people who look at their billions and combined trillions of dollars in wealth and could easily remedy the problems of homelessness. They've got you blaming the homeless. They've got you blaming the homeless because somewhere in that homeless person's life, they had some moral failing. And if they had not had a moral failing, even if it's just a failing of laziness, then they would not be homeless, when in fact, this system is created on the exploitation of every single individual, including you listening to me now. But they don't want you to talk about that. And so what they do is they give you, it's not just the billionaires. It's not just their mouthpieces in the media. It's not just the endless. Why do you think there's so many trolls? Do you think all these people on social media are actually out here? Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of the bumpkin conservatives who actively do their own propagandization, right? But there's money to be had in this. And they're all here to plant a seed in your head to make you turn your rage about everything that's broken in this society and never turn it towards the most powerful, but to always turn it towards the powerless, which guarantees that the system will never change, which guarantees that your personal problem that you're facing in this system will never change because you have found someone to scapegoat. Rather, they have given you someone to scapegoat. And now you become a part of the system, blaming people who have even less power than you. But now here's the flip side of it. How utterly ridiculous do they look blaming somebody who has no power? What kind of simpleton, moronic, sociopathic cretin are you that you would look at a homeless person and blame them for your problems instead of blaming the system that creates homelessness, that sustains homelessness, and in fact will, if it hasn't already, find ways to profit off of homelessness. All of that power, and the best analysis that your little brain could come up with is that the poorest people in the world are actually the problem with the world. conservatism and frankly, any ideology that shifts the focus away from the powerful in our society is laughable at best. It is comical. It is bereft of any substance. It is not deserving of any of our respect or our civility. It must be destroyed because it is a tool of this system to protect the powerful when the powerful are literally the culprits. They are the villains in this story. The villains in the story of humanity are the powerful, the economically powerful, and the politically powerful. So govern yourselves accordingly. And to be sure, it's not just white conservatives who do this, who blame the powerless, right? I don't want you to leave here thinking that analysis of the powerful and the powerless and who we blame and who we turn our rage towards only exists in white conservatives. I have 2 black mayors, one in the city of Chicago to the east of me and one in Atlanta to the south of me. Lori Lightfoot, Keisha Lance Bottoms. Particularly Keisha Lance Bottoms. Mayor Keisha, when I lived there, everybody was like, oh, it's Wakanda, the blackest city in the world. It's a great city. This black mayor used the tragedy of the murder of an 8-year-old little girl, a precious 8-year-old little girl. She used that as an opportunity to delegitimize the fight for black lives against the police state. Over the weekend, she said that we, black people, we have done more damage to ourselves than any police officer ever could. Now, never mind the fact that is a purely white supremacist whataboutism that is constantly levied against black people on a regular basis to undermine our fight against state-sanctioned murder. It is the what about black on black crime that always comes around from racist white people when they don't want to talk about how this government has been complicit with the murder of so many black people that I can't even name them all. Never mind that fact. It is the fact that she, in her role as mayor, is a servant of the state, protecting the powerful and blaming the powerless. Never mind the fact that she is using this occasion, this tragedy, to make all of black Atlanta responsible for the death of this child, lecturing black folks who have been doing everything in their human power to fight against racism, to fight against violence in our own communities, who have not only protested against police violence, but they protested against violence in our own community. But yet and still, there's something that happens when black people speak up against this powerful system. What happens? They make every single black person responsible for every single black death. And yet they will not do the same thing with police officers. They know they barely make the individual police officer who killed a black person responsible for the death of that black person. They will never do to police officers or white people, for that matter, what they do to black people, which is to blame them for every death that ever happens in their community. But I want you to be sure of something. It's not just white conservatives, Southerners, Confederate flag waving, whatever caricature you had constructed in your mind as I gave my diatribe. It's not just that individual. It is anybody who is a servant or an agent of the state. These mayors are not a part of our community. They are literally, in the function of a mayor, agents of the state. And so, of course, they are going to blame the people and not the powerful. Of course, they're going to blame the powerless when they themselves have the ability to address the underlying conditions that leads to violence. There is a direct correlation based on academic study. There is a direct correlation between poverty and crime and violence and murder. A direct correlation between it. And yet these cities never do anything about it. They never address the underlying economic conditions, because then the powerful would actually have to be held accountable for their role in this. And so they don't blame the powerful. They protect the powerful by blaming the powerless.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions.
And here we go. At this point in every single episode, I'd like to take a second to thank the people who make the show possible, our patrons. Very special welcome to Stephen Payne. Thank you for becoming a patron. John Frank, Nicole, Ben Diagno, Dejo, Christopher, Kathleen Straub, Hoy, Macy C, Ari. Everybody just bop your head. Ari, thank you for becoming a patron. Hannah Michelle, Curtis Ekman, Travis Smith, Daryl Shipman, Gina Moriarty, Antoine McKinney, Mark Roper, Oludeyu George, and Devontae Goins. Thank you for becoming a patron. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron family by going to patreon.com/The BPD Show, where you get twice the content, uncut, unfiltered interviews, none of the commercial interruptions, and you give me the ability to speak power to the powerless, whether the powerful like it or not.
Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Yeah. So this is twofold. Like the practical usage and application of everything that I just said, it actually comes in twofold. Number one, it's a call to action for us to fight on behalf of the powerless wherever we see them. Whether you agree with them morally, whether you agree with them based on your religion or not, whether you agree with their particular politics, the powerful have to be held accountable for how they treat the powerless. Whatever you believe, you have to believe that. Whatever you believe, in my faith as a Christian, we are called to serve the least of these. Literally, the powerless. But we have, of course, the religion has been taken over by, the powerful. Listen, 99% of your complaints with religion, notwithstanding the fact of evidence or anything of that nature, but most people's complaint with religion is that it is a tool of oppression. And that's on purpose, because how could you have a powerful message out there empowering powerless people? How could you allow of course, religion had to be co-opted by the powerful because it was a threat to their power. They do it with everyone. But I digress. That's not the point. The point is that whatever you believe, whatever you don't believe, whatever your values are, whatever your personal morality is, we must fight on behalf of the powerless, or else we become complicit with oppressors who will at any moment turn that oppression towards us. In fact, we are existing in a system of oppression, I don't care how comfortable you are. You are existing in a system of exploitation in one form or fashion. At some level, you are being exploited by this system. And if you ever turn your ire, your rage against the powerless, you are propping up the very system that's exploiting you. Always side with the powerless. Always fight on behalf of the powerless, even if it's relative power. Maybe, listen, I will fight on your behalf, even if you are a thousandaire. I'd have to pray about whether or not, if you're a millionaire, whether I'm going to fight with you. But in terms of relative power, listen, we are fighting against wickedness in high places. These billionaires who are trying to, who are more concerned with their profit margin than lives. You can't get any more wicked than that. They are more concerned with their own personal greed, satisfying their own personal greed than this environment. They would watch this entire environment burn and prepare to launch themselves out into colonizing Mars to do it all over again. What we are fighting against is really, it's a level of solidarity that goes way further than our usual delineations in terms of wealth. You're not wealthy if you're a millionaire. You could be poor next week. You're not wealthy if you got $100,000 in your savings account. You're doing better than probably 99% of the world. Yeah, but at the end of the day, you have more in common with me than you have with the billionaires. And the other practical application clearly is to see through the bereftness of their arguments, how utterly fatuous and childish and irresponsible and sociopathic for them to blame the powerless in a system that is dominated by the economic and politically powerful. Patrons, stay tuned. Everybody else, I'll see you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.